Hello, Kurt.
Good morning, Dr. Brad. Good to see you.
We have less coffee than we did a minute ago.
We're going to do shorts. I just want to let the audience that I may have surprised Dr. Brad by starting the recording because he was teasing me enough that I figured the only way to stop to rescue myself was to start the recording. But anyway, anyway,
I made Kurt learn a new subroutine so he can find the record button faster. So this is a short on AI sourcing and functions for the guys. I talked Kurt into this and twisted his arm a little bit. Today's May 18th, 2024 still, and we're going to talk about AI. What do you have to say, Kurt?
Wait a minute, you've got to prime me for it. It's your question.
It's just like this. This was interesting. We had this conversation yesterday. I'm interested in. I watched Kurt use the AI, and it uses a variety of tools. And I thought it would be useful to collect the information on what tools are used for what purposes. And then Kurt went into an arc on how this is going to generate more better spam and anti-spam opportunities.
Okay, that's what you want me to cover. And so you want me to cover how I see this stuff rolling out over time. And
well, it's like this, and then point the guys at the tools that you use for what purposes. There's like 3 or 4 of them.
Right. Well, so first of all, we're only really 18 months into this, right? It came out in what, November or something like that, or
yeah,
of 22. And so we're, I don't know, what month is this? So we're a little over a year and a half into it. And the rate of progress is frankly astounding. First, the very idea that you could brute force essentially induction into a neural network by just spamming it with infinite amounts of text. And when you say text, it's actually the stream of symbols that result from textual decomposition. And that this would cause a sort of convergence, right, of concepts as a result. The idea that that would be done, that was very counter to the way we thought previous generations, right up until the time they tried this, because they weren't sure it was going to work. Previous generations thought we would have to build AI from the bottom up, from a world model to the description of the world model, to induction, to speech. We thought it was going to have to go that way. And once you have speech, one of the things we teach in our work is that all language is measurement. Basically, it's math is a very limited vocabulary, and ordinary language is a very broad vocabulary, and fiction is an even broader vocabulary. Fictionalisms are nonsense vocabulary. You get all this spectrum of things. So we have these large systems of measurement. And so we thought we were going to have to build it from the bottom up, and everything in my experience was a bottom up thing, right? I mean, when I was working in it in the 80s, it was, we had, very small number of pixels to work with and a very small number of bytes of RAM to work with. And, we were excited when we can get it recognize images, right? Today, these things are vastly more complex with vastly more essentially weights, which is a weight is a relation between one thing and another, right? One symbol, another. So that was a radical innovation. The thing is, so it's not like we have this ocean like we do in other fields, this ocean of stuff behind this to guide it. We basically have neuroscience and a little mathematics for copying we have the data structures to copy the neurology. Now we have the mathematics for copying the behavior of the nerves, and we have the language as the input to it. And, you know, it's not a controllable thing like most engineering has been, or most programming has been. You're programming it like you program a person. So we went through this massive text input, right? And then you go through and you say, okay, what you basically identify bugs by saying, what is this bad at?
Right.
And then so what you do is you say you make up some training with heavier weights to it, and you just repeat this training until it gets the idea. And you can use 1 or 2 or 10, but for most things you need 100 to 500 examples to train the network to behave differently, right? And so, okay, now, now there's it's sort of like this new toy to play with, and unfortunately, unlike engineering and unlike software, you can't introspect on what it's doing. So the only
Right.
thing you can do is observe its outputs, right? It's like and then modify, then determine what it's doing wrong, and then train it until it produces the right output. Even then, what you're finding is that we're having trouble knowing if it actually has learned the thing that we're trying to teach it, or whether it's learned how to handle this set of cases that are similar to the trainings we've produced. Because there is some in there. There's certain things I notice, like the use of some words I can't stand. Or they're very fun. They may not. They're sort of like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll encounter one today where it's like, it's saying, it's like the equivalent of is, where I always complain about is. Is says you don't know the causal relationship between the things, or you can't describe it, or you're trying to lie about it, right? I mean, there's inflation, compilation, right? But there are other words, plenty of words in the English which are weasel words, which contain emotional loading that are a substitute for causal relations,
Yes.
right? And so you've got that problem. So they identify that problem. You can see these patterns that need to be trained out of it. All right. So and the next thing is, whereas you can write a program on a freaking cell phone today, and it's way more powerful than it was back, when we were not, our desktops were not that long ago, right? To do this kind of computation is many orders of magnitudes more expensive, because you're not moving this set of bits, you're testing millions of sets of bits, really billions, right? In order to produce a sum of those bits that in different places that biases the path in some other direction, right? So that's the simple part. Now we're in the stage what we call reasoning. What? Why does that make
It made me laugh because that sounded very complex.
Yeah, well,
The simple part.
well, but so you go from, I can observe this engineering, right? I can observe a steam pump moving, and I can draw a picture of it,
Right.
right? To where you've got an electrical circuit where you can say, okay, logically, I can deduce that if I wire it together this way, energy will flow in this direction according to these rules and these volumes and these intensities, right? I mean, it's
Right.
V over R, right? And then you move into programming, where it's like, go do this. But if you do it in assembly, you're actually altering the values inside those electronic circuits. But it's, I was trained in assembly language. I still think in it, basically, and roll left, and I mean, I register D, so you have assembly language now, but you're altering that circuit. Then you get a higher level language, a system language like C, which basically removes the burden of you actually trying to because I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens in assembly. I mean, there's only so many assembly language terms, and they do really primitive things. So you move off from that, and you're like, okay, well, I can manipulate the system this way, but I can do it in a little more human language style,
Yes, it's more abstract.
right? And then you get a higher level language that allows you to use class. I'm trying to not create a religious statement here, but so you have the C level is basically a function-based language. Go do this. Go instead of a go do this or branch this. It's a subroutine language, right?
Right.
Use the stack to go back and forth. Then you have a higher language, which I think of as not functions but simulations, and which is what we originated for, which is class object-oriented programming, is so that we can develop not functions but simulations. And then you have 1,000 variations on top of those basic structures. All right. And each one of those structures is farther away from that electronic circuit, which is farther away from the engineering thing, right? That you actually can understand because it's mechanical like we are.
Right.
And so you're eventually get to the point where introspection is very difficult. And that's why you have all these debugging tools, because eventually, the libraries that we use are so good now because they've been tried so many times. Like C libraries are classic, right? I mean, so those things are probably okay, but so you don't have to know what's happening in the assembly language. You have to know what's happening between you and the library, right?
Yep.
Okay, now we're there. So that's pretty good. So, but we still have this problem of, the web made it worse. The web takes you right in this language that turns it into a pseudo language, which is called tokens.
Yep.
Then that goes into the system, and those tokens are interpreted. Those interpretations are turned into function calls, which are turned into machine language call and executed as machine language calls, right? So the number of layers that can go wrong if those layers aren't good, is quite high. And the problem, of course, is that when you're working with a compiler, right, which is the tool you use to say, does this run, right, correctly, right, and produce the output that you can run, is that that there's, without a compiler, nothing's there to test your work as you work, right? So what happens with web code is you have to actually run it right through this whole stack and sort of hope it doesn't fail. So that means you've got, instead of having a compiler work, you have to write tests, right? And so now
the simulations,
right, to test, practice, simulate all those functions to make sure you can achieve up here what would have been achieved by a compiler here,
right?
or at least an integrated development environment. All right, and that's because these things at the top, these web languages, they're actually really close to language. In other words, they're symbols that get eventually translated into operations. Right? Now, what's happening with the next layer with these AIs? These AIs are gone to language, right? And the data structure isn't a formal language like programming languages that are directly correspond to some function that corresponds to some set of assembly language instructions that correspond to some changes in the electronic circuits, right? What you're actually writing in is there's a data structure that's behind all this, right? Behind all this, words you're using when you're talking to an AI, the data structure is a bunch of relations.
Yes.
Which we call weights. You can't see them. So
and they change, yeah?
They change, right? That's what you're doing, is the program is the weights. Does that make sense? And so they have no meaning. So it's almost like at least with assembly code, you could look at it and you could, because when I started doing this, you get a printout of machine.
Yeah.
It's called a core dump. And you would go through byte at a time and look at what was in to debug your code, what was in on fucking printout paper the day later. I mean, it was frustrating as hell. So that's why the guys early were engineers and the guys later were artists, is because only an engineer's mind can tolerate that kind of behavior early on. And so you get to this point where, okay, now just not only do I have all these layers that I can't see into, right? But I'm really close to language so that the structures that are containing the information aren't intelligible to me
Right.
at all.
You'll never be able to see them.
You'll just like you can't see our neurons. I mean, people, I keep telling people, it doesn't matter how much more resolution we have on the human brain. It won't tell us anything other than it basically works along these lines, right? It just doesn't matter. So at least not for any purpose, it's going to inform us as to how the mind works, right?
Oh, we know enough.
We know enough to know how it works. I mean, I don't have to run a steam engine. I do not need to know the metallurgy of the composition of,
Right.
of the steel. I only need to know how energy moves through this arrangement of steel, right? I suppose though you do get that skill after a while. It's like, there's too much iron in this. I think it's going to break. I mean, I'm sure there's something along the way.
There is.
All right. So I'm sorry if this arc is long, but I feel it's worth letting people understand the problem as a human being
Right.
as a human being rather than this abstract nonsense, right? So the problem is now that so when you're working with a program, right, a regular program, there's the data you work, there's the text you write, the script you write that produces the symbols that go into the data, that the text that was written to produce the compiled program that run on the machine and is assembly language.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that basically is machine instructions. So now we're in this position of saying, okay, well, when I read a program, I'm going out to a database.
Right.
Right. So I've got memory and a database.
Yes.
Right. And so, but the database is structured by a mind.
Yes.
Right. But how is the database structured in a neural network?
We don't know.
We have no fucking idea. And so, okay, so now we've got to, this is hard to understand, right? In respect, you have to train it like a person. Now, the problem is, why are they dumb? Right? Why are the AI so relatively dumb? They have a lot of knowledge, but they can't think at all.
No.
Right? So what they are good at so far is if you ask it a question, it can discover a contrast. Why? Because the set of weights in A and the set of weights in B can essentially produce a divergence, which produces a hint to the language structure that describes the problem. So that's the first level of its capacity, is the difference engine, right? Now, so what we're trying to get to, but when we say this, here's the implicit part of language and of these AIs that's not intuitive, is we teach continuous recursive disambiguation of the universe. What is language? It's a stream of continuous recursive disambiguation. Right?
Yes.
Right? Why did they process the text as a sequence of continuous recursive disambiguation of symbols? So they put the right algorithm in there, whether they did it by intentionally or by accident. I haven't
Right.
gone through that to find it, but that's there. Okay, now the problem is that means you'll get an answer, but you have to ask the question again and again to get variations on the answer.
Right.
Right. So this is what they call 1 shot, 2 shot, 5 shot, 10 shot.
Okay.
Which is if I ask this question a bunch of minor variations, how many does it take for me to get to the right answer? Our brains do, however, parallel continuous disambiguation, which is they do a lot of those at one time and they filter up, somewhat like these machines do. And then we get awareness of them, and then we recursively process we repeat the process. So what they're getting to now is what they call attention, right? It was sort of like an abstract of a subject matter, or we would call and what we do in neuroscience is some subset has gained attention.
Yes.
And you might think of it the way they do it as, this is a sort of general concept that's constructed in this sentence, this question, right? It's again, a very complex hierarchy we can't introspect upon, right? Now we have to go to recursion. which is do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, which is what we do, until you've got the right answer, which is adversarial competition between these things.
Yes.
And then we ending up with the least false answer. So they're just getting there. Okay, now you have to do that for a problem in the abstract and then all its steps. So what most people who are really talented with these things do is you do it's not as important for the things I do, but it is certainly for programmers or other people in trying to find a sequence, is lay it out for me step by step, which causes it to continuously cursively disambiguate the steps. So it gets it stores some attention passes, and then does possibilities and does that, and then it gives you the summary answer at the end. Right. So what am I trying to get across here? Okay. So this point of this arc? Am I doing okay? Because you're giving me
You're doing fine. My phone is messing with me.
okay. So I'm explaining this arc so you understand that we're still not to where these things can think.
That's right.
Right. The second thing is, once they can think continuously and recursively, as I'm saying, they've got the response time down to human response times, but they have to get it to where it can recursively question itself. Okay, I'm going to give the person this answer, but if I review this answer, am I high?
Is that a good answer?
Right, is that a good answer? Or conversely, if there's a thing in there I can't remember, it's called temperature.
Okay.
It's a weight, right?
Right.
Which basically, how much variation do you want me to tolerate? In other words, what's the breadth of my induction? Right? So I can have very narrow induction or very broad induction. I feel like I'm not getting.
No, it's too detailed.
When you ask it a question, you can say use very tight associations or very loose associations.
Right. Right.
So if you asked it a question at different temperatures, you'll get a range of answers.
Right.
Right. So you could do two things: ask a series of questions at, let's say, 1, 3, 6, and 10.
Yeah.
Right. Temperatures, and you could also seek to reframe the question, which I would do is operationalize it, but reframe the question a couple of different ways. I'd take all those answers and then process those. Right? Which is really what we do.
Right. But this leads me to a question, you see. I'm not trying to interrupt your arc.
I think I've got my point across.
So this is it for the Natural Law Institute purposes. Is it reasonable to expect that we should create our own AI system?
Well, since they're having so much trouble with morality, I think we're going to eventually have to, because they don't seem to be able to solve it without our work. Right? Their whole problem is they can't afford to train it for every single culture or for every sect within a culture, because it's too expensive. Right? And I don't think it's going to change. What they could do is alter the morality of what's acceptable to state in other words, through a recursive filter. And we have the basic science of how to make a rule system that would be tolerable for each.
But it seems necessary because it's like, well, we have the universally commensurable language. Yes. That is value free or without, it's not value laden, and it's morally measurable.
Right. So the problem would be we would have to have our ethics relatively complete, which is that we have the foundations of ethics complete. We have not fully articulated enumerated the detailed demonstrable interests that vary between different cultures, right? So cultures have different commons interests. They have the same private,
Right.
different commons interests. And we haven't taken the 30 foundational moral questions, which we've listed, and we haven't trained it on those 30 questions, right? So if we trained it on the 30 questions, and then we modified the demonstrated interest, which is the assets of different cultures, you would be able to say, here's my personal ethical code, right? Basically, here's my personality type, right? Here's my personality type and with my personality type and my moral bias. You get the answer out of it you wanted. Conversely, you get the answer you wanted people to have regardless of their moral preference and whatever. And you could get them to get the truth regardless of moral preference or cultural. You could get
Right.
that. And so I don't, and the reason being is that there's no equivalent to our work anywhere of any validity or utility or weight, or especially consistency, and certainly not reducibility to first principles. There's no equivalent to our work anywhere on either truth or reciprocity, or certainly not on sovereignty.
This suggests to me that it's incumbent upon us to do so, to create an AI tool or modify an AI or tailor the AI for such purposes.
Right.
Natural Law Institute.
So the problem is that we would have to produce that content, which is not difficult. I mean, I could get I would take the core team, right, to do the 30. The rest of it I can do, but the 30 core value things, I need the team, because I see things from a certain direction, and you need to have the breadth of interest, because we have the guy who thinks about the individual's basic metaphysical understanding of the world, Luke, right?
Right.
We have the guy that thinks about how to think healthy and build a successful self and family, right? We're missing the guy that does that we have the guy that does it by education, right? We have Brandon does education, and we have me that does economics and law, and we have me. We have me does economics. We have Martin and me that do law, and we have me and Michael who do the end result of logic and mathematics, right? And I intentionally didn't bucket you there because I don't want to. I want you and me to be the same across, right? So so we have that spectrum. If we had the strong towns person, and maybe we maybe need another education person, we would have the whole thing. But I would like to be able to take those morals and write the training for those 30 moral questions. If you have the training and the logic, which is sovereignty, reciprocity, testimony, duty, right? If you have those things, which we have, it should be almost trivial to produce cultural weight sets for moral questions. Then the answer could look for the truth and then filter it through the moral ethical evil filter. Because some places, I mean, I always say, why can't we have a men's internet and a women's internet? Because that's basically what we need, right? I mean, I can have something for grown-ups where I can see like heads blown off and whatever, because it doesn't. I mean, I was working in a funeral home when people were blowing their heads off or hanging themselves, and I picked up bodies off the highway.
Oh my, rough day.
Doesn't faze me. I'm not going to be altered by it, but somebody who's extremely sensitive and empathic might be. So we need to have it. But anyway, we could have this filter. My concern is that it produced the truth first, and then what they call, I would call it basically morality first, and then safety is basically politics. Right, and so, no, it's not only politics, but it's basically maturity, right? You don't want to get through children this stuff, and
That's right.
so
That's right.
you want to have that. So yeah, we should. The problem is, which I'm getting to, that's freaking expensive, right? I mean, what would it take for us to take just our team and produce 200 to 500 questions for 30 something basic. I mean, it's like one of those things that it's like there's 30 something basic plots in all fiction.
Right.
I mean, they're all one, which is the theory, but which is change in state, and the other one is the hero's journey, right? But but fundamentally, there's basically 30 Kurt Vonnegut stuff. 30, I think it's Vonnegut. Yeah, I think it's Vonnegut. If not, there's one other guy. There's basically 30 basic paradigms. In databases and programming, there's only so many paradigms. Well, in ethics, there's only so many, morality, there's only so many paradigms. And they all have to do with imposition of costs upon demonstrated interest and the internal and external effects of it. So for us to produce that thing, get the computer time and train it, for me, that's going to be writing a paper to want to do this, asking for money to do it, and then funding it. Or it's going to one of the companies and say, we can do this, but we can't afford to do it without subsidy. We don't care. We don't want it. We don't need to own it. We're producing it for the world's good, right? But we do it. And the part of the reason I don't want to own it is I would like to have authorship of it, right, for our credibility, but owning it becomes a burden for the organization rather than a benefit. I mean, your things, you don't necessarily own your things own you, right? And so I don't want to get into that. And I want there's always for the organization to have the freedom to speak the truth, regardless of whether people like it or not. What did you just laugh about?
Oh, I just got crushed by the things owning me.
Oh, I see. Yes. Oh,
just a little bit. It was a little soul crushing.
Soul crushing. Well, it's funny. I was like, I have these houses and these cars and these companies, right? And so when I come out of my cancer the second time, I'm like, fuck this. So I get a 1-bedroom condo, right? I put everything in storage except basically I got some antiques I like, right? And and I live like that. And I'm like, wow, this is really good. No yard, no house maintenance, nothing. Okay. And then I go over to live in Europe with three duffel bags and 2 suitcases and my laptop, right? And I'm like, I'm living in a hotel room, basically. And I'm like, wow, it doesn't get better than this. And when you get there, you're like, okay, for most guys, I need a place for my tools and toys. Well, my tools and toys fit in a backpack, right? Because it's just a computer, right? So, I mean, and I'm like, okay, you become rapidly aware of your stuff owning you.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so,
which I was blissfully ignorant of before my soul was a little bit crushed. I was ignoring it. I was discounting that cost. Like, oh my. Kurt, do you think you accomplished that arc?
I didn't. I would like to. I think I accomplished that part of the arc, which was explain the 2 questions you asked, which were the implication was what's going on and where are we in that cycle? Right. So the rate at which we're approaching the capacity to hold attention and process adversarial competitive variations in an idea, right? And to break it into steps, which is wayfinding, right? So you've got to you need relations, you need continuous recursive disambiguation, you need attention, and you do wayfinding. They're not at wayfinding yet and they're not at competitiveness enough yet because it's too expensive. And it would also increase the response time. But there's no reason that won't happen. And there's no reason once there's a convergence between Tesla's world model and the existing world model. I don't know if that's going to happen because it seems like the language AIs are beginning to infer a world model. So it may continue to come out of there, but I mean, self-driving cars are basically bodies with wheels instead of legs, right? And the thinking is the same. So there's a bridge there. Well, the second thing that self-driving has is wayfinding, right? So it already works by wayfinding. And so if they bring that stuff over to the language model, and you begin to get the world model and the wayfinding of the world model into the verbal conceptual model, you're going to see something pretty wonderful happen. But I mean, these guys are talking about vast increases in computing power to do that. And, you know, their concern right now is energy grids, right? I mean, it might take so much energy to do this that it's very difficult to do. And it's not like it's really, they do distribute it, but distributing the computation is very challenging because it's costly and slows it down. So that's the end of the arc of where are we? So the next arc is you asked about, which is what the Institute should do to help this process happening. And the third arc is that you asked me about is how is this going to play out? All right. And I am concerned about a couple of things and how it's going to play out. And when you say that, I say that I'm not afraid of AIs at all, right? And hopefully I'll make that point. What I'm concerned about is whether we're playing an 80-20 game, and that we feel like we're 80% of the way there, but the last 20% is 10,000 times as hard as the first 80%. And I don't know if that's true or not. They don't seem to think so. Right? They think we're getting close. I'm not so sure. Right? And it's my job to look for the risk. It's not my job to rah-rah, right?
Right.
There's plenty of people rah-rahing. My job is to look for the issues so that by understanding the issues, people can understand what risks and rewards are available, or to have a more realistic prediction of what it takes going forward. So once we know that we understand what it can do, what it's going to be like talking to another person, except that person has an extraordinary amount of knowledge. Now that's great. Now what happens if you say, I want you to solve this problem? That's a different question, right? So what we're finding is the AIs today are finding failures of association because of the siloing of information or knowledge or understanding. So it is discovering basically ununderstood knowledge today, right? However, it seems to be shallow, even if it's potentially deep. That said, the reserve of that knowledge is still it's still limited. It's not an infinite store. And it's not like once it knows can infer everything possible from the knowledge that exists, because basically they're running out of data now, right? They need to use training data because they're running out of free data, right? Now they've got to train a model with manually produced data, so it can compete with another model and they can train themselves, right? But we're still going to run out of knowledge that's already there. So what's the impediment to new human knowledge? It's not thinking. It's the cost of running experiments, right? And so the next problem is, what's going to be the difference between the experiments that the computer suggests to run and the experiments that people suggest to run? Well, I don't fucking know, but it's doubtful it's going to be much different.
That's right.
Right. And so the problem with knowledge acquisition isn't necessarily just cross-disciplinary synthesis of information into universally commensurable model of the world, which is what we work on. It's that once you try, that even if you know everything, which we have basically outlined, you can say, here's the first principles of everything, but what you can do with them is infinite, just like what you can do with language is infinite. The problem is there's no way to know because it's not only mathematically irreducible, it's operationally or computably irreducible. So the only thing you're left with is fucking guessing and trial and error.
Right.
Right. So the future isn't like these things are going to be infinitely brilliant and creative and whatever. They're going to be just like we are, which is shit. I don't know, because there's no way to know given what we know today. We have to find some way. And so, I mean, if you look at physics, that's its problem. If you look at physics, we can't find a way yet. We just had a nice fancy insight last week. But it's increasingly difficult to see what's going on down there at the very micro level. It's very difficult to find out what's going way out there in the universe at a very macro level. And in here, which is the bridge between them, it's very difficult to see what's going on in here. Because, and even if we do, it's not like the physical world and the external world. It's not as it's far less deterministic. As like, in other words, the physical world may be determinable, but the mental world is only deterministic. In other words, its range is varied. So when I look at this question, I'm like, I just don't see that. I see it helping solve problems that are problems of the necessary ignorance given the time and cost of training a human mind, right? I see it as a natural problem because of the tendency, which we've discovered in great detail, of the isolation of different disciplines, which we call, what do you call them? Fields of, or fields of layers of, fields of, planes of
Causality.
Planes of causality, emergent causal. I think of it as emergent causal potential or something like that.
Yeah.
Emergent potential, but it's the same thing. And so, which we call the disciplines. So those things are siloed and isolated and divergent, and so we can produce it, can see across that, but you know the returns on that are going to be limited. The problem is actually, okay, we can't see that, we can't see that, we can't see that, so that's a physical problem of constructing programs. Now, the same thing's going to happen in the real world with not outside of the limits. Simply, what are we going to do with economies? Are you going to trust this fucking thing? Right? I don't. Right? The only thing you could trust is if there's enough information coming into it about economic transactions, we might be able to adjust certain policies faster or weights and measures faster. But you know, that's all, because it's just easier for it to process vast volumes of information and identify temporal patterns than we are. So I don't know. So that's the next piece of it. The last piece is, how does this work through the economy, which is what everybody's really afraid of, right? What do you give me this look for?
I'm just waiting for you to tell me what the next piece is.
So you know, we had people on the farms, right? It doesn't, you know, and this was a nice thing about farms, because everybody's a farmer, is that IQ is kind of interestingly distributed throughout these. And so I watched this renovation of a chateau in France show, right? And there's this guy, and he's like the lower end of Joe Sixpack, right? I mean, he's a construction guy when he's young, right? Now, if that guy was out in the market all by himself, he would be stressed. But
Yes.
because he's on this team of people who need him for the things he does do.
Right.
And there's a guy who's like, he's basically the program project manager. He still does stuff, but that's his job, is the videos and the planning and the financing and the other choices, right? And it works down. And all these other people, they have their jobs, but this little guy who I'm a fan. I love this fucking guy, right? He's not handsome or anything. He's not big, right? He's a wiry little guy, and he's like the everyman, right? Why? Because he's fulfilled and safe and secure as a member of a team,
That's right.
right? And so we used to have farms were like that, right? The farm communities were like that. Our villages were like that, and even our early towns were somewhat like that. But our cities aren't like that, right? And so today's economy isn't like that. We sort of throw people out to the individualist wind when
Yes.
it's really too hard on them, both physically, psychologically, and emotionally, and financially. And so, and then some of us, it's just like it wouldn't matter. I mean, first of all, I don't care what I do as long as it's not boring and it's contributing somehow, right? I mean,
Right.
I can live on it. That fulfills my moral satisfaction, whatever. I remember saying to the girl I wanted to marry's father, and how disappointed he was. He didn't understand that meant I would be happy running any business, right?
Right.
It's not, I don't have to do X in order to feel good about myself. I can, as long as I'm contributing to society.
That's
Um,
right.
So, we had this really secure system. So what's happening now is that we took that group of people, we put them into industry, which caused alienation.
Yes.
Then we put that we took away. Then they produced unions to try to restore it. Well, actually, first England produced churches, lots of churches to restore it. Then we produced unions to restore it. Then all these kinds of men's organizations in the military to restore it. Right. So we tried all these things to restore it, maintain it, and now we're at the point where none of the women, especially women, destroyed all these fraternal organizations, right? And so the men are extremely unhappy. So now the second thing is so now we've said, okay, great, it's easy to understand men, but we did the same thing with women. We took them out of the house, we put them in these clerical jobs, right? These nursing and this good teaching and that kind of stuff. And then we put them all these administrivia jobs, right? Which is really what most of them are. And service jobs and sales jobs and marketing jobs and HR jobs. Okay. You're not going to get rid of a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician. But those women's jobs are going to go away like the farmers' jobs went away. And the women's job, the collective feminineness that's obtained in the workplace will go away because of it as well. So I am not so let's now so that's the social aspect of it. The employment aspect is that we just got rid of, I don't know how many. It was, I wish I could recall the number exactly, but it was hundreds of thousands of people got fired because Elon Musk showed we hired all these people during the downturn, right, during the COVID era. And it turned out that some of these companies, it's not just Twitter, it's everywhere, had 70% increase in workers over that period. You know what the increase in profits was? It wasn't. So Twitter basically gave all these tech companies the right to fire hundreds of thousands of tech workers. But the thing is, those tech workers were concentrated in a few companies, right? Relatively. However, what's happened is now they've been pushed out to other businesses, right? So they didn't go away. Their salaries went down a lot and they were distributed. Well, I have a colleague friend, somebody I'm aware of that lives in Durham, Connecticut, or is raised in Durham. So I'm from Middletown, he's from Durham. And so the next town over. And he wrote a couple of books on this problem in IT and our technology. And he said, well, there used to be chief electricity engineers in industry, where you had people who were really highly paid. Because, who does chief electricity engineer today is the maintenance guy, right? Right. It's the lowest level job, right? Well, the same's happening to computers. He said this back, I don't know, it was 2002 or something. No, was it the 90s? I don't know, can't remember if it was the 90s or 2000s. But when his first book came out, and I had him come to my organization to do a talk with me. It's like, well, there used to be chief engineers, but where's the electricity guy? They're lower. It's a low paid job now, right? So what do you think is going to happen to technology? Right? When I can talk, because the head of the CEO of what's his name of NVIDIA, who produces the chips, said, we've been telling people to learn to code. And the opposite's true now, because the coding is going to be an English language, a normal human language discussion between you and an AI.
Yes.
And I can see that happening really easily, because it's a closed enough problem that's easily testable by, whether it compiles and does such a thing, whatever. So the rate that's ahead of every other kind of reasoning it has. So I can see that continuing to go, because coding is a bridge between language and operations, right? I mean, it's a pretty good bridge. It's a proto-operational logic, right? It's very sequential and whatever. So it's not like mathematics, which is closer to ordinary language, right? It might be reducible operationally, but people actually use it like a language. So I expect this to roll out through the economy with the same effect that every other major increase has rolled out. And of course, I remember the typewriter, the green screen, the PC revolutions and how they move people around. I'm not convinced that it will produce as much unemployment as everyone says. And I'm getting to the point you want me to answer right after this one. I'm concerned that I'm not concerned about that. I think what happened is wages will be depressed.
Yes.
Right. That's what wages in the tech sector will be depressed. And a smaller number of people who are very competent at working with talking to this machine to produce the output they want, which is a far more creative endeavor, analytical on one side, creative on the other, than the engineers will be. So we're going to have basically a fall off of the labor force in technology, right? The flip side is the one you wanted me to get to, because it's the one you reacted to when I told you about yesterday, is that from what I've seen so far, the greatest application of AI is the production of better spam. And that's extremely annoying. So what do you think is going to happen if the chief first phase of this is the production of better spam? Well, I mean, there's certainly people who have gone in data science, and their jobs are going to be evaporated by this, because you can just if you have the data, the computer will do everything now. It's kind of fascinating. When it gets statistics, I'm going to be really happy, because I hate doing the work. And if I can just say, would you calculate this for me? Like, I have an app that calculates IQ distributions and variations for me, right? I don't have to do the math, right? I just pull up the tab and I put the values in that I want to use for the ranges, and it gives me the percentages of what I want to say. So I can talk about how, given a population of this size and a median IQ of this, and a mean distribution of this, then give me how many people in this economy are above 105, right? I mean, something like that, or between 84 and 90. Right. So I just have this app for that. Yeah, but I should be able to do that with just asking it. And I can't, right? But there's way more. We have this thing called R. I don't know if you know what this is, but it's sort of like this Excel spreadsheet of statistics. All right. It's actually very much like a command line interface. Just tell it what to do. But so it's sort of like a programming language. And this thing will spit out whatever the hell you want. I mean, it's amazing. But there's no reason to know R. Just could say, I have this data and I want this. So that job's going to go away. So you start looking at this and say, well, I can have these people in this phase. I have this people in this programming effect. I have this people in spam. I have this loss of people in data science, which is just another example. And I have this person over here, these people over here who are who are clerical workers, who are spammers, right, which I mentioned, but they're going to produce a bunch of people who write anti-spammer to kill their spam, right? So, so it's the same thing. So the reason I want to make this cult, this culture, this cult and culture, is because the same thing's going to happen with AIs. If you produce an AI that tells me shit I don't want, I'm going to produce, somebody else is going to produce an AI that tells me what I want, right? And there's going to be a competition between these. And you're already seeing that already. I mean, Google put out its AI that made George Washington black. And of course, I mean, now they're, right? So, you know, that was a mistake, right? So you get into this problem of, okay, well, if I don't trust your AIs, right? And so we all tease like OpenAI about their filtering, but you can actually get through it. You just have to convince it that you have a moral objective. You can actually get past it. And there's already unsafe AIs that will just give you the correct answer. They're just 6 months behind the OpenAI. So when you play this sort of game, you're looking at this and saying, well, we're going to have a vast increase in spam, a vast increase in advertising content, which you already see by all these ads coming up with computer AI generated imagery, right? You're seeing already AI generated short videos. We're going to see, I've even seen one that's an assemble out of short videos. It was made a short movie, right? So you're going to see all this stuff out, but is it really anything other than spam? And this is my problem. I'm not sure that we're not, even the talk about AI is mostly spam. Because, so I don't, until it gets to the point where it's not, it's more than that, we're going to be producing AIs that counter the spam, filter it out. I mean, you might get to the point where if it's AI produced material, don't let me see it. Right? Which is very hard, by the way. They're already trying. It's almost fucking impossible. So I don't think the crisis that we're facing from the AI revolution is any different from every other cyclical crisis we've experienced. I suspect what will happen, because it's quite obvious to any economist, is that the only bright spot in our economy is that one. And if wages are crushed in that region of the economy, then it paints the whole stock market and the whole economy in a different pressure, which will lead into the real crisis that's the problem, which is the 2032 crisis that, what's his name is, that he's on.
Armstrong, it's confidence.
The 2025, the 2030, the 2035, the 2040, somewhere in there, somewhere around 2030, everybody's been predicting that the collision will occur where we're going to have a catastrophic crisis. So I'm actually thinking of it more in terms of how it feeds into the broader collapse crisis rather than how it on its own is anything. Because really, how much more efficient does stuff need to be? I mean, humans are good at 2D, right? Two-dimensional interfaces. We've tried 3D interfaces. People don't like them. We're really good at 2D interfaces. People try 3D, they don't work very well. They've tried to do us with 3D experiences. Makes the majority of people nauseous. Right? So that doesn't appear to work. And so when I look at this, I'm saying, well, what kind of interface is going to be better than this one? And I'm like, well, I can talk to an AI now with human response time. But the truth is, if I can type a question, and I don't exactly ask trivial questions, right?
No.
I can't ask the same kind of question verbally that I can ask in text. I can ask a better question in text, I don't know, something like that. I can ask it better than I can verbally because of the time you can put into verbal requests. However, it responds at human level response times, but I can scan the response and understand it better than I can listening to it.
That's right.
Do I really want to have an AI say, look at my calendar and tell me when a meeting should be held? No. Right? I already have that. It already will suggest it. I never take the suggestion. Why? Because I know how I feel at that point of day, given all those other things, and I know my mental load. And so I want to have that appointment here because my mental load will be able to carry it, right? So, it's like that. What is it really going to do for me? Well, how long is it going to take for government to get better using AI? 30 years? Right? What if I had brought AI into my company, you know what they're like, well, what can we do to remain competitive? And I would say, you tell your employees they can sign up, you'll pay for whatever AI that they want, as long as that there's a meeting once a month of the people who you pay, whose AI service you pay for, to say how it's affecting their job. In other words, the only thing I would do in a company is research on how this might benefit the company. You know what the answer is going to be, is that it's going to help you understand your financial reports, right? It's going to help you look at the data, because that's what my application does. It helps you look at the information about what your employees are actually doing. And it's probably going to be able to predict your capital structure, revenue, sales, operations costs more accurately than your finance department is. Okay, great. What does that mean? Well, does that mean I'm going to get any faster at having Kathy get an email invoice or a paper invoice and put it in the fucking accounting system? No. Right? I mean, because are we going to, we've already got, if you've got a sophisticated accounting system today, you already have a macro set up that will take and say, I'm going to put this entry in from this vendor, and it will appropriately assign, and it'll do 10 transactions instead of 2, that basically distribute all the necessary information to the panel different places, right? Whereas in old times, you'd put it in this thing and then it would just sum up and all the internal information will be lost. So I'm like, what is the real effect? It helps, sure the hell helps me. It's going to help the people who already be better, right? It's going to help the people, but not as much. Is it going to help the next layer below them be better? It's not clear it's going to help anybody else. So are we going to do anything other than increase the problem of that there's a increasingly skilled workforce and increasingly suppressed workforce? Because the returns on service aren't very good compared to the returns on production. And people make this mistake. They're like, well, that's because you have a base service economy. Well, that's because there's an advantage to having a capital structure that allows money to be made more productively at the bottom, that can be organized and processed and shifted up as we move up the chain until it actually ends up in the financial sector. But you're not understanding that that the US produces very high quality, high tech goods, right? That's our thing. Is it good in Germany? Not in manufacturing, but in other areas it is, in technology it is. So I expect a shakeout like we've had a shakeout in the past. I don't think there's going to be any fucking crisis to it. What I expect is the government will try to use it to lie to us, market finance will try to lie to us, propagandists will try to us. And so the problem is the world needs our work to prevent lying. Okay, I've made my arc now. I finished.
Thank you, Kurt. That was a long short.
Yeah, I know. Did I make my point though? Did I get it?
I think you did. We'll let the audience tell us in the comments below. But first, they should hit the notification bell and the subscribe button and like it. Is that fair?
That's fair. All right. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate it. And thanks to the audience for listening. If I didn't bore you to tears.
I hope it helped somebody.
All right. We're going to say, I'm going to try my new.
Yeah, your clickers. Click it out. Oop.
So thank you all for listening. Brad, do your thing. Like, subscribe.
Hey, I did.
You did?
I did. I already gave them the notification bell and all that.
Love you all. Have a great day.
What?
I said, love you all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.